your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Welcome to our show honoring the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We are coming to you on location from the beautiful Writing on Stone Provincial Park. And for anyone who has never visited this park, well, it is an absolute gem in southwestern Alberta, only a 90-minute drive from Lethbridge. It's been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And throughout our program, we'll show you exactly why. Although the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is Saturday, September 30th, throughout the week leading up to Saturday, there were many ceremonies and activities across the nation that honored the stories of residential school survivors. Here in southern Alberta, two new exhibitions at the Galt Museum and Archives are making sure the stories of these survivors are never forgotten. Both showcase firsthand stories from Indigenous people, including one from the Kainai First Nation or Blood Tribe. Video journalist Micah Quinn has the details.
According to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, more than 3,200 children died inside the residential school system, and hundreds more remain unidentified. The first exhibition at the Galt Museum is called Stolen Kainai Children, Stories of Survival, which sheds light on individual stories from Blood Tribe members during their time in the residential school system.
I never went to residential school, and that is one of the number of questions that I do get asked for my fellow tribe members who are also intergenerational survivors, is what happened, because our family members who did go through this don't really talk about it.
The second exhibition is titled Escaping Residential Schools, Running for Their Lives. Between the two exhibitions, there are currently over 24 stories that are on display.
So it's important for people to learn about those different methods that the government of Canada used, and how they were kind of a continuation of different attempts at assimilation.
No one understands the pain and trauma inflicted on the children of the residential schools quite like the students themselves who attended them. We had the opportunity to speak with one such survivor of a school outside of Edmonton. George Brown went on to later become an RCMP officer and also became active in the military. But it took years for him to overcome the pain of his childhood. Take a listen.
They took us by train and, at 5 o'clock in the morning, something was up and nothing felt right. And right from the get-go, you know that you're going somewhere, but you didn't know where. They separated you at the train station and they loaded you on the train. So you're fighting and screaming your lungs out, and there's nothing you could do at 5 years old. So when we arrived in there, they call it delicing you, okay? They take some, they call it DDT. And they just threw that right on top of your head in the shower. Right? And right to this day, I still have skin problems. You never had anything to eat. You'd have 5 slices of bread on the table there when you're lined up and praying, and then there's 10 or 15 kids fighting over that 5 slices of bread. So you never had anything to eat, and then violence and. All we're taught is violence, sexual abuse, mental and physical abuse, and spiritual abuse. So you ended up with a broken heart and a broken spirit. So that's the bottom line with all that stuff.
Ever since the horrific discovery of unmarked graves at the sites of several former residential schools has gone public, authorities and public figures have made it a priority. But a former guest of mine had been trying to get leaders to take action on the subject for years. Kevin Annett spent decades trying to shine a light on the atrocities of residential schools, but no one seemed to listen. Annett had a podcast and wrote a book on the topic called Murder by Decree. For his book, he interviewed many residential school survivors. Here's a small excerpt of my 2021 conversation with Kevin Annett. Can you tell us about the challenge of getting the victims of the school to actually come out and talk about it?
Well, it's not only the problem of when you've been traumatized by a horrible experience. That isn't just in the past. It's an ongoing crime. I mean, children are often trafficked off, Indian reserves. There's a lot of this continuing genocide going on, as we've documented. So that's the most basic factor. How do you come forward and speak, especially in a country where you're not a citizen under the law? When you're on a reservation under the Indian Act, you're what's known as a ward of the state. You're not even a citizen under the law. You're like a child under the law. So you can be locked away. You can have your rights violated. The law doesn't apply to you if you're a native. Also, their own chiefs have warned them off from talking about children on the ground. So all of those factors, it's a miracle if anyone comes forward.
After the break, we hear from another residential school survivor who was also the victim of the little known 60s scoop. We'll be right back. A former residential school survivor and victim of the 60s scoop says when it comes to the tragedy of residential schools, the federal government needs to take more responsibility. Deborah Manous is also a Christian minister who counsels others through grief and tragedy. Here she is in a 2021 interview with Hal Roberts discussing how the 60s scoop changed her life.
Now, Deborah, you were actually a victim of the 60s scoop. You survived being in a residential school and suffered abuse at a very young age. How did some of those experiences really shape you?
Well, I had PTSD for many years in my life. And my brother, my older brother, he had suffered with scarring of the heart because there were times that we had, different problems with our health, and we were not taken for medical care. We were not properly looked after that way. My brother at one time, he had whooping cough, as well as myself had pneumonia, and we weren't even taken to the hospital. So that affects your heart, affects your lungs, the scarring, whatnot, and different situations that affected us physically as well as emotionally and mentally. And it was through years and years of counseling that, and also prayer, that had a powerful impact in my life in bringing healing and restoration to me and my family.
Amen to that. Deborah, should Canadians be more outraged as to what transpired during the 60s scoop and with our residential schools?
Well, Hal, we recently did a prayer Zoom call, and we had residential school survivors on there, as well as 60 scoop survivors sharing their stories. And we had also, other brothers and sisters on there, Canadian folks that were part of the call. And when they talked to me afterwards, they messaged me and said, we were shocked to learn of all of these things that happened to the First Nations people. We didn't know how bad it was, how it affected the kids when they were small. And, it really made an impact on the people that were listening, on all of us. And, at the end, the residential school survivors, they prayed for healing to come and restoration, and really believing, that it is the, it was a little God that was portrayed to the children in the residential schools, not the big G, not Christ Jesus that, came and restored and healed so many of us. And many of the folks that were on the call were First Nations ministers and intercessors that had healed from all this. So it is an eye-opener. It is definitely an eye-opener. It caused a lot of emotion, even with the folks that were on the call. And I think it's really good for us to understand, when something like this happens. Like for myself, I learned so much from the Jewish people when the Holocaust had happened. And that's very important for us to know, the history of a nation.
I have to admit, I was never taught about the 60s scoop or residential schools back when I was in school. Instead, we learned about Louis Riel, the rebellion, the FLQ crisis. Do you feel that perhaps residential schools should be part of the school curriculum today?
Yes, it's very important. I've been teaching my grandchildren. I have 14 grandchildren. I've been teaching them as well as the 60s scoop. I've traveled to many, many communities and churches in the last year and a half talking about my book. It's called Scooped, A Stolen Generation. And in there, when I talk about the 60 scoop, I asked the folks in the audience, have anyone ever heard of? They knew about the residential schools, but they didn't know about the 60 scoop. So yes, I believe it's very important that we educate ourselves and our children about it. It's part of our history.
Now, the former residential schools were not only run by the Catholic Church, but were eventually taken over by the federal government, and former Liberal Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his Indian Affairs Minister was Jean Chrétien, who went on to become Prime Minister. Should Canadians be outraged at the Liberal Party today?
There was, within the Constitution and in the Indian Act at the time that they made up, that they were to go after the children and take them away from the homes. Now, this was all drawn up by the Canadian government. It wasn't made up by the church. So I really believe that, there needs to be more responsibility taken by the Canadian government.
Up next, the story behind the famous petroglyphs and pictographs of the writing on Stone Park, and it's exactly why the park got its name. Welcome back to our Truth and Reconciliation show. We are on location at Writing on Stone Provincial Park, and joining me is Rebecca. She's my tour guide today. Rebecca, thanks for actually bringing us into the park here. This is amazing.
Awesome. It's really my pleasure. This is a really special place, so I'm glad that we could spend some time here together.
It really is, and my understanding is it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Correct, yeah. So in 2019, this area received a UNESCO designation for outstanding universal value and as a living cultural site. So this place is most associated with the Blackfoot people. It's likely that there have been other First Nations people for whom this place is important as well. But really we're in the heart of Blackfoot country. And this place has always been known as special to the Blackfoot people. This is still a place where people come to visit to connect with this remarkable place.
Yeah. Oh, it's so easy to connect with the land. Like it just feels almost so spiritual when you're here. It's just beautiful. And you have brought us to this amazing spot where there are actually pictographs, petroglyphs right around us. Maybe you can show us some of these.
Sure. I'd be happy
right
to.
now.
So like you mentioned, there are both carvings and paintings, so petroglyphs and pictographs. So some are incised and some are painted using red ochre paint. And if you want to come this way, I'll just point out a few of the markings.
Wow, look at this.
The markings do extend for about 1 kilometer, and they're most concentrated here in this section of the park. That is a restricted access zone, and that is for their protection. Sadly, there has been problems with graffiti and vandalism, so that's something that we're really trying to educate people that is not appropriate for here. The markings that we find right here are very distinctive, and we see lots of individual people who are holding these great big round shields. So
almost like in a circle there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these are very large, heavy shields that would be used for protection. And shields were very important in the past, but they also give us a clue to the age of the picture. Because with the introduction of rifles, the shields were less effective. And so usually when we see pictures of shields, that tells us that predates contact with European people. So probably these are more than 300 years old. And there are definitely some that are much older than this as well. So that's one of the ways we can tell the age of the pictures is by what's in the picture. If you see a picture of a gun or a picture of a horse, you know that those are a little bit newer because those were introduced by European people.
So it's almost like a little history book right there on the wall.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
And so, but even going back much further, some of the markings here are probably close to 2,000 years old. And I'll just show you another example. If you look up here, there's another picture of a shield, but it's almost been erased by the weather. Wow. You can see the bottom of the shield right here, and one leg there and one leg there of the warrior. But time has taken a toll and erosion is happening all
I was just going to
around us.
say, good old erosion.
Yeah. So those would have been even older than these. So there have definitely been people here connecting with this place. This place has always been known as sacred to the First Nations people. And this is considered a place where you could connect with the spirit world. So the ochre pictographs are kind of an exciting area of research in the park. because using new technology, we can enhance the visibility of some of the paint that is quite faint.
Oh, wow.
So here we can see, using computer software, that we can see a lot more detail on these warriors with their shields. This one you can see has a headdress. This one, where you can hardly see it with the naked eye, but with the enhancement, you can see a lot more detail. So their head is painted, their legs are painted.
Here we can certainly see the passage of time, can't we?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So for many years, it was assumed that these vehicle pictures were made by maybe early settlers or the Northwest Mounted Police that were in this area. But there was a person who really was an expert in the markings, and he started to think that maybe these were made by a Blackfoot artist. And so he kept investigating and doing research, and he ran into somebody who had a photograph that really helped to solve the mystery. So this photo was rediscovered, and it is a picture showing a Blackfoot elder named Bird Rattle carving these vehicle pictures.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for being my personal tour guide out here at Writing on Stone.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for coming.
It's just been fascinating being shown these writings and just kind of understanding the meaning behind them. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but after the break, as these writings are being protected and preserved, so too is the Blackfoot language in our region. And we're going to dive into that next. Welcome back. Well, just as these writings behind me are being protected, so is the Blackfoot language, as communities across the region are about to see some original Blackfoot names come back to life. A project aiming to resurrect the Indigenous language through the use of signage hopes the initiative will enrich the landscape, invite people to take an interest in the history of our region, and move closer towards reconciliation. But according to Arnold Fox, who is the Director of Social Development for the Blood Tribe here in Southern Alberta, it's sad that many First Nations are losing their languages. Take a look. Well, it is Truth and Reconciliation Week, and we are honoring the Indigenous people and taking a deeper dive into the culture, including the language. I'm pleased to have Arnold Fox joining me today. Arnold is the Director of the Blood Tribe Social Services. And welcome, Arnold. We're so grateful to have you with us today.
Happy to be here, Jeanette.
Okay, so why don't you maybe start off by telling me a bit about what you do, what your work kind of looks like over there at Blood Tribe Social Development?
Okay, well, in relation to the Blackfoot signage project and in relation to the Blackfoot language, our department stepped forward to host what we eventually called 8 Weeks Language Committee. So 8 weeks means Blackfoot speaking. That's what that phrase, that word means, 8 weeks. So we're the speaking language group. And the task that was given to us, it was instituted a little over 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. The major part of our task is to help preserve the Blackfoot language and to help the language itself move along and adapt to current terms that are used today in our everyday language. So that's why it's a dual function. We realize that a lot of First Nations across the country are losing the language. I believe there's some dire predictions that within 25 years, we will just have 3 First Nation languages still functional in Canada.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's quite astounding once you think about it. And I grew up with the Blackfoot was the first language, and I can't really envision not being able to use that or not giving it to our children and our grandchildren to be able to carry forth. So that was the gist of our task in that committee. The committee itself has 10 to 12 elders who come together once a month, and we offer an annual symposium, Blackfoot Language and Symposium in Lethbridge. It's the most convenient location. There are some representations from other Blackfoot nations in the area, Blackfeet in Montana, Nation near Pincher Creek, and Siksika near east of Calgary. So those are the Blackfoot-speaking nations in North America.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So out of that, I would say I'm being optimistic by saying 20% of us still use that language on an everyday basis. So it definitely is in fear of dying at a certain point or not being utilized anymore. So that's what we're hoping to. That's what we're hoping to avoid. You know, we're realizing now with the programs that we offer, even in social services, we offer short-term employment training for our clients, and we have fully realized over the years that one of the modules they take is the Blackfoot culture and the Blackfoot language. I used to take for granted that our younger people had this opportunity to learn at home and all of that, but that's not the case. We were, in my generation, we were lucky that there was a very limited amount of influence from media. So the everyday language we heard all the time was Blackfoot.
You were mentioning that they're predicting there could only be 3 Indigenous languages left. How many are there? I mean, there must be hundreds, right?
Well, yeah, if you stop to think there are 500 plus different First Nations in Canada, to get an idea. Of course, there's regional, you know, like the Woodland Cree have a big area in most of the provinces. So that language I know will survive because there's a lot of speakers over an extended geographical area. But once you start, like I said, becoming too insular, you don't have that opportunity. And in our population too.
After the break, we look at ceremonies around the southern region of the province that honor Truth and Reconciliation Week. We'll be right back. To mark the start of Truth and Reconciliation Week, a ceremony was held Monday at Lethbridge's Civic Center, track featuring a special round dance. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains, local dignitaries and Indigenous leaders took part in the event.
Traditional Indigenous drumming had participants stepping to the beat to kick off Reconciliation Week in Lethbridge.
But when you're brought in to any of the activity and dance, it's a real honor for anybody who is non-Indigenous, because that's showing friendship and kindness, welcoming, and equality. So those are some of the values that we're sharing throughout the week, and I would like to highlight in all the work that we do from the Indigenous Relations Office at the City of Lethbridge.
This week is also about recognizing the survivors of residential schools and those who unfortunately did not make it home.
Because there's not one Indigenous person who has not been affected by residential school. With their generations, those who don't speak our language, our Blackfoot language, or other Indigenous First Nations or Métis language. So it's important that we all recognize that there has been a disconnection from our culture. It is very intentional historically by the government.
The Reconciliation Lethbridge Advisory Committee works together to bring forth important events like Reconciliation Week here in our city.
We also are the voice that goes to council and says, these are the things that we've noticed. These are some of the gaps that we've noticed. As I said earlier, there's bold conversations yet to be had. And so it is, as a co-chair, it's my opportunity for me to stand in front of council and administration and say, these are some of the things we are working on, but we would also like to see this happen in the future.
For a full list of events happening this week, you can visit our website. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
A smudging ceremony took place at the University of Lethbridge, marking the official kickoff of the campus's Truth and Reconciliation Week. Kathy Hunt, who is an elder from the Kainai Nation, performed the smudging ceremony and prayed for all the students and faculty. Hunt says some of her family members were residential school survivors, and she shared many of those stories with the students.
My mother was a residential school. She went. My maternal grandfather went to residential school, but my paternal grandparents didn't. So I was privileged to know both But what I'm using today is my paternal grandparents because this is my culture, my way of life. I just want to encourage all the students, to be open-minded, and as they say, sometimes truth hurts. You don't want to hear it, but there's a reason why. Maybe it's time to acknowledge it and learn, because sometimes it's not what you think it is. You're just healing. It's just healing.
A traditional buffalo winter count robe was unveiled Tuesday morning at Lethbridge College. It was the post-secondary's way of honoring National Truth and Reconciliation Week. The robe will be used as a teaching tool for students and faculty at the college. It was designated by artist William Singer, who worked on it over the summer months. He explains what the symbols on the robe actually mean.
With every robe, there's the beginning, and so at the beginning you see a sun. And next to the sun, you see some plants and a moon. So the moon and the plants represent the month of June. And that was when the artwork started on the robe. And so from there, then we have a representation of a Napi effigy. Napi is our creator and our trickster. And so a lot of the knowledge that is transferred in the Blackfoot worldview, a lot of them are based on the Napi stories.
The robe will be displayed on the campus for everyone to learn from, but will also be brought to other commercial events, including convocations and classrooms. The Blood Tribe Department of Health's Wellness Program celebrated its 100th day treatment program on Tuesday afternoon in Standoff. The celebration also coincides with this week being Truth and Reconciliation Week. The day treatment program began in 2021. A member with the Blood Tribe Department of Health explains its significance this week.
We are trying to showcase our success, not to the community, but outside community people, so that they know what we do here. And the most important thing is we are trying to neutralize the difference between the communities, and we are trying to make sure that we are not just limited to Blood Tribe. This is a program which is open to other communities as well. So to bring harmony, equality, and peace among communities.
How badly will Bill C-47 affect local health food stores? Well, after the break, we'll dive into that.